Trump's ploy at the United Nations is American imperialism masquerading as a peace process. The Trump administration is pushing an Israeli-crafted resolution at the UN Security Council this week aimed at eliminating the possibility of a state of Palestine. The resolution does three things. It establishes U.S. political control over Gaza, it separates Gaza from the rest of Palestine, and it allows the United States, and therefore Israel, to determine the timeline for Israel's supposed withdrawal from Gaza, which would mean never. This is imperialism masquerading as a peace process. In and of itself, it's no surprise. Israel runs U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. What is a surprise is that the United States and Israel might just get away with this travesty unless the world speaks up with urgency and indignation. The draft UN Security Council resolution would establish a US-UK-dominated Board of Peace, chaired by none other than Donald Trump himself, and endowed with sweeping powers over Gaza's governance, borders, reconstruction, and security. This resolution would sideline the state of Palestine and condition any transfer of authority to the Palestinians on the indulgence of the Board of Peace. This would be an overt return to the British mandate of 100 years ago, with the only change being that the United States would hold the mandate rather than Britain. If it weren't so utterly tragic, it would be laughable. As Marx said, history repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. Yes, the proposal is farce, yet Israel's genocide is not. It is tragedy of the first order. Incredibly, according to the draft resolution, the Board of Peace would be granted sovereign powers in Gaza. Palestinian sovereignty is left to the discretion of the board, which alone would decide when Palestinians are, quote, ready, unquote, to govern themselves, perhaps in another 100 years. Even military security is subordinated to the board, and the envisioned forces would answer not to the UN Security Council or to the Palestinian people, but to the board's, quote, strategic guidance, unquote. The U.S.-Israel resolution is being put forward precisely because the rest of the world, other than Israel and the United States, has woken up to two facts. First, Israel is committing genocide, a reality witnessed every day in Gaza and the West Bank, where innocent Palestinians are murdered to the satisfaction of the Israeli Defense Forces and the illegal Israeli settlers in the West Bank. Second, Palestine is a state, albeit one whose sovereignty remains obstructed by the United States, which uses its veto in the UN Security Council to block Palestine's permanent UN membership. At the UN this past July, and then again in September, the UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly for Palestine's statehood, a fact that put the Israel-US Zionist lobby into overdrive, resulting in the current draft resolution. For Israel to accomplish its goal of Greater Israel, the United States is pursuing a classic divide and conquer strategy, squeezing Arab and Islamic states with threats and inducements. When other countries resist the US-Israel demands, they are cut off from critical technologies, lose access to World Bank and IMF financing, and suffer Israeli bombing, even in countries with U.S. military bases present. The U.S. offers no real protection. Rather, it orchestrates a protection racket, extracting concessions from countries wherever U.S. leverage exists. This extortion will continue until the global community stands up to such tactics and insists upon genuine Palestinian sovereignty and U.S. and Israeli adherence to international law. Palestine remains the endless victim of U.S. and Israeli maneuvers. The results are not just devastating for Palestine, which has suffered an outright genocide, but for the Arab world and beyond. Israel and the U.S. are currently at war, overtly or covertly, across the Horn of Africa, Sudan, Somalia, North Africa, Libya, the Eastern Mediterranean, Lebanon, and Syria, the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen, and Western Asia, Iraq, and Iran. If the UN Security Council is to provide true security in accordance with the UN Charter, it must not yield to U.S. pressures and instead act decisively in line with international law. A resolution truly for peace should include four vital points. First, it should welcome the state of Palestine as a sovereign UN member state, with the U.S. lifting its veto. Second, it should safeguard the territorial integrity of the state of Palestine and Israel, according to the 1967 borders. Third, it should establish a UN Security Council mandated protection force drawn up from Muslim-majority states. Fourth, it should include the defunding and disarmament of all belligerent non-state entities, and it should ensure the mutual security of Israel and Palestine. The two-state solution is about true peace, not about the politicide and genocide of Palestine or the continued attacks by militants on Israel. It's time for both Palestinians and Israelis to be safe, and for the United States and Israel to give up the cruel delusion of permanently ruling over the Palestinian people.